For 60 years, gardeners arrived each morning at a clifftop estate in Santa Barbara. They mowed 23 acres of lawns that no one walked. They planted seasonal flowers that no one saw. They pruned trees that shaded empty terraces. Inside a French chateau overlooking the Pacific, housekeepers dusted furniture wrapped in protective coverings dated and signed in the 1960s. They washed dishes that would never serve a meal. They maintained a 27-room mansion kept in perfect condition for an owner who never came. The woman who paid $40,000 a month to maintain this palace spent the last 20 years of her life in a hospital room in New York. She owned 3 magnificent estates totaling more than 75 acres and 80 rooms. She chose instead to live in 2 rooms at Beth Israel Medical Center, painting on an easel and watching cartoons with a collection of dolls arranged on miniature furniture. Her name was Huguette Clark. She inherited one of the greatest Gilded Age fortunes ever assembled. She lived to 104, spending her final decades as one of the wealthiest and most reclusive women in America. The palace she maintained but abandoned became the center of a $300 million legal battle, and the question no one could answer was simple: why spend millions preserving a place you refuse to see? This is the story of how copper mining fortunes built a California dream house, how a shy heiress turned a mansion into a time capsule, how a palace sat frozen for 6 decades while its owner lived in voluntary exile, and how the strangest mansion story in American history asks what we're willing to preserve, and what it says about us when monuments to our past become mysteries we can't explain. The story begins not in California, but in the copper mines of Montana. Before we step into one of the strangest stories in American mansion history, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by the forgotten palaces of America's wealthiest families and the mysteries they left behind, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Chapter 1. The Copper King. William Andrews Clark was born January 8, 1839, in a log cabin in Pennsylvania. His family had nothing. He would die 86 years later worth $200 million. Having built a fortune so vast and a reputation so toxic that Mark Twain called him the most disgusting creature the Republic had produced since Tweed's time. The path from poverty to infamy began when Clark moved west in 1863. The Montana Territory was in the grip of gold rush fever. Men were getting rich. Most would lose everything. Clark arrived in Bannock, the territorial capital, and tried his hand at placer mining. The work was hard. The returns were modest. He learned quickly that the real money came not from digging gold yourself, but from supplying the men who did. He bought a team of horses and a wagon. He drove between Salt Lake City and the Montana mining camps, hauling eggs and basic supplies that desperate miners would pay premium prices to obtain. The margins were excellent. He invested the profits in a trading post. When miners defaulted on credit, he accepted their mining claims as payment. The foreclosed properties accumulated. Some contained copper. In the 1870s, Clark studied metallurgy at what is now Columbia University in New York. He returned to Montana understanding something most prospectors missed. The future was not gold. It was copper. The Industrial Revolution demanded copper for telegraph wires, electrical systems, and machinery. Butte, Montana, sat atop one of the richest copper deposits on Earth. Clark began buying mines and smelters. He became one of 3 men known as the Copper Kings. The others were Marcus Daly and F. Augustus Heinze. They fought each other with bribes, violence, and political manipulation. Clark won. By 1900, his copper empire employed thousands. He owned railroads, including the San Pedro, Los Angeles and Salt Lake line that he personally financed for 1,100 miles. He owned newspapers in Montana and Utah. He owned banks, sugar plantations in California, oil wells in Long Beach, wire factories in New Jersey, and bronze foundries in New York. Las Vegas began as a way station on his railroad. Clark County, Nevada was named in his honor. The fortune came not from innovation, but from ruthlessness. Clark's political career demonstrated the methods he employed everywhere. In 1899, he bribed members of the Montana state legislature to elect him to the United States Senate. Senators were not yet chosen by popular vote. State legislators made the selection. Clark reportedly spent more than $300,000 buying their votes. Envelopes stuffed with cash were preserved in the National Archives. When the scandal broke, the U.S. Senate refused to seat him. He resigned in May of 1900 before formal rebuke could be issued. He tried again. In 1901, he was successfully elected and served a full term through 1907. His colleagues were not impressed. They said that if you took away the whiskers and the scandal, there would be nothing left. Mark Twain, whose friend had been ruined by Clark's business practices, was more direct. In 1907, Twain wrote that Clark was as rotten a human being as could be found anywhere under the flag, a shame to the American nation, and that his proper place was the penitentiary with a ball and chain on his legs. Clark never denied what he was. He simply didn't care what others thought. When he died on March 2, 1925, his fortune was conservatively estimated at $200 million. Adjusted for inflation and economic growth, that equaled approximately $3.6 billion in contemporary value. He was one of the wealthiest men who had ever lived in America. He left no universities, no hospitals, no libraries bearing his name. Montana, which had generated his wealth, received virtually nothing. He was a founding donor of the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington. The family connection to that institution would extend through his daughter's lifetime. Otherwise, his philanthropy was non-existent. His personal life generated as much controversy as his business practices. His first wife, Catherine Stauffer, was a childhood sweetheart from Pennsylvania. They married in 1869 and had 7 children together. 5 survived to adulthood. Catherine died in 1893. 8 years later, Clark married Anna Eugenia LaChapelle. The marriage scandalized society. Anna had been Clark's ward. He had raised her after her father died. She was 23 years old. Clark was 62. The age gap was 39 years. They claimed to have married in France in 1901, but didn't announce it publicly until 1904. The announcement was buried 6 pages deep in a rival newspaper. Together they had 2 daughters. The younger was named Huguette. Chapter 2. The Daughters. Anna Eugenia LaChapelle was born in Michigan in 1878 to French-Canadian parents. She was cultured, sophisticated, and fluent in French. Her passion was music. After marrying William Andrews Clark, she gave birth to 2 daughters. Louise Amelia Andrée arrived on October 7, 1902. Huguette Marcel followed on June 9, 1906, born in Paris while her father was serving in the Senate. The girls grew up in extraordinary wealth. Their father owned a 77-room mansion at 965th Avenue in New York. The house was filled with art, servants, and the constant activity of a man managing a financial empire. Andrée and Huguette were educated by private tutors. They studied French, music, and painting. They traveled to Europe regularly. The family also owned properties in Montana, Washington, D.C., and Paris. Huguette was shy. The word appears in every description of her childhood. She preferred quiet activities. She painted. She played the harp. She collected dolls, French dolls with elaborate costumes and porcelain faces. She spoke in what people later described as a little girl voice, even as she aged. Her sister Andrée was more outgoing, but the 2 were close. On October 12, 1919, Andrée Clark died of meningitis. She was 16 years old. Huguette was 13. The death marked a turning point. The family donated 135 acres to create the Andrée Clark Bird Refuge, a freshwater wetland in Santa Barbara. Huguette would contribute funds to the refuge in 1928, 1930, and 1989. Her sister would be remembered in the landscape her family loved. 6 years after Andrée's death, William Andrews Clark died. It was March 2, 1925. Huguette was 18 years old. Her father's estate was divided among his widow Anna, his youngest daughter Huguette, and the 5 surviving children from his first marriage. Huguette's inheritance was estimated between $50 million and $100 million in 1925 currency. Adjusted for inflation and economic growth, that equaled approximately $900 million to $1,800 million. At 18, she was one of the wealthiest young women in America. After her father's death, Huguette and her mother Anna became inseparable. They would live together for the next 38 years. In 1925, they moved from the 77-room mansion to apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue. The new residence was smaller, but still substantial. They occupied the entire 8th floor, plus additional apartments, totaling 42 rooms with views of Central Park. On August 18, 1928, Huguette married William MacDonald Gower. He was a Princeton-educated law student, the son of her father's top accountant. The wedding took place at Bellosguardo, the Santa Barbara estate her father had purchased 5 years earlier. The ceremony was private. The marriage lasted less than 1 year. Huguette and Gower separated in 1929. The divorce was finalized in Reno, Nevada on August 11, 1930. She was 24 years old. She would never marry again. Later in life, she told people she had never been married at all. The psychological erasure was complete. The pattern was establishing itself. Wealth, loss, withdrawal. Her sister had died at 16. Her father had died when she was 18. Her marriage had failed before she turned 24. Huguette retreated into the world she could control. The apartments with her mother, her painting, her music, her dolls. She and Anna sought privacy. They sought escape. Her father had purchased something before his death that might provide both, a property in Santa Barbara with views of the Pacific that stretched to the horizon. Chapter 3. The Beautiful Lookout. The property sat on a bluff 200 feet above the Pacific Ocean. From the clifftop, the view stretched west across water to the Channel Islands. On clear days, you could see 50 miles. The land covered 23 acres with 1,000 feet of ocean frontage. In 1923, William Andrews Clark paid approximately $300,000 in cash for the estate. The purchase included an Italianate mansion the previous owners had named Bellosguardo, Beautiful Lookout. 2 years after the purchase, on June 29, 1925, an earthquake struck Santa Barbara. The magnitude 6.3 quake damaged hundreds of buildings throughout the city. The original Bellosguardo mansion was among them. The structure survived but required extensive repairs. The house stood long enough for Huguette's wedding in August of 1928, but Anna Clark had already decided the damaged mansion would not be saved. She wanted something different, something that reflected not her late husband's American ambition, but her own French sensibilities. She wanted a chateau on the California coast. The architect she selected was Reginald Davis Johnson. Born in 1882 in New York, Johnson was the son of the first Episcopal Bishop of Los Angeles. He had studied architecture in Paris and at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, graduating in 1910. His practice specialized in the Spanish colonial revival and Mediterranean styles that defined Santa Barbara's architecture. He had designed the Santa Barbara Biltmore Hotel, which opened in 1927 to acclaim. Johnson understood classical proportions. He could adapt European styles to California's landscape and climate. For Anna Clark, Johnson designed a French chateau with Georgian influences. The style would be Beaux-Arts, emphasizing symmetry, restraint, and classical elegance. The structure would use modern construction methods invisible beneath traditional exteriors. Steel and poured concrete would create a fireproof, earthquake-resistant frame. Indiana limestone would face the concrete, giving the appearance of solid stone masonry imported from France. The landscape architect Ralph Dalton Stevens was engaged to design the gardens in formal French style. Years later, Jacques Graber would refine the grounds. Graber was a celebrated landscape architect who would design Philadelphia's Benjamin Franklin Parkway. His father, Henry Léon Graber, was a renowned sculptor who created bronze and marble fountains, specifically for Bellosguardo. The fountains featured classical statuary, figures from mythology rendered in bronze, mounted on marble bases. The original Bellosguardo was demolished. In 1933, construction began on Anna's vision. The project would take 4 years. Chapter 4. Building the Dream Cruise cleared the earthquake-damaged structure from the clifftop site. The foundation for the new mansion reached down to bedrock. Steel I-beams were erected to form the skeleton. Poured concrete encased the steel, creating a structure designed to withstand anything California's geology could deliver. The method was relatively new for residential construction, Most houses still use traditional load-bearing masonry. Anna Clark's requirements for large interior spaces, without supporting columns, necessitated the steel frame approach. The entire structure was concrete. Walls, floors, and ceilings were poured and reinforced. Over this frame, craftsmen built the visible house. The exterior was clad with Indiana limestone veneer 3 inches thick. Each block was cut to precise dimensions and numbered for placement. The limestone arrived by rail from Midwestern quarries. Spanish tile covered the roof. Wrought iron details decorated balconies and railings. The plan was U-shaped, measuring over 20,000 square feet. 27 rooms were distributed across 2 main floors. 6 bedrooms were designated for family use. 3 smaller bedrooms housed servants. The ground floor contained reception rooms, a library, a dining room with painted canvas ceilings removed from a French chateau and reassembled in California, and a music room that was Anna's particular vision. Music was her first love. Huguette's needs were addressed with a private wing. Her art studio featured 17-foot ceilings to accommodate large canvases. North-facing windows provided the even light painters preferred. A loft above the studio stored finished work. A private kitchenette and a back stairway to her bedroom suite ensured she could paint and live without interrupting or being interrupted by household activities. Interior finishes were elaborate. Chandeliers were custom designed. Wood paneling covered walls in the library and main rooms. Terrazzo and tile floors were installed throughout. French doors opened to terraces that surrounded the house on multiple sides. The integration of indoor and outdoor space was deliberate. Johnson understood California living. Outside, Ralph Dalton Stevens laid out the gardens. Formal terraces descended from the house toward the cliff edge. Gravel paths wound through planted beds. Mature trees were transplanted to the site, eucalyptus, cypress, and palms that would frame views and provide shade. The Graber fountains were positioned at focal points where water and sculpture could be appreciated from the house's main rooms. The gardens were designed to be viewed from the second floor, where the geometric patterns and symmetry became most apparent. The construction occurred during the Great Depression. Labor was abundant. Materials, while luxurious, were less expensive than they would have been a decade earlier. The total cost approached $3 million. Adjusted for inflation and economic growth, the expenditure equaled approximately $70 million in contemporary terms. By 1937, the mansion was complete. Anna and Huguette had built one of the finest estates on the California coast. The house stood ready. Chapter 5. The Quiet Retreat. The mansion could accommodate hundreds of guests. Anna and Huguette Clark rarely invited more than a dozen. The 27 rooms were designed for multi-generational family living and grand entertaining. Mother and daughter used a fraction of the space. They came to Bellosguardo when New York winters became oppressive. They stayed for weeks, sometimes months. Then they returned east. The California Palace served as an occasional retreat. Nothing more. It was never their primary residence. The apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue remained home. A permanent staff maintained the estate year-round. 3 to 5 workers lived on or near the property when the family was absent. A caretaker, gardeners, maintenance personnel. When Anna and Huguette visited, the staff expanded to 6 or 10. A cook prepared meals. Housekeepers cleaned. Chambermaids attended to linens. The estate functioned smoothly. But it was not the center of a social whirlwind. Daily life at Bellosguardo was quiet. Huguette painted in her studio, the 17-foot ceilings and north light creating ideal conditions for her work. She played the harp. She walked the gardens, following gravel paths between planted beds, pausing at the Graber fountains. Anna enjoyed the music room, where she hosted small gatherings. Dinner parties were intimate, 6 people, perhaps 12. Rarely more. Musical evenings featured Huguette's harp playing and occasional visiting performers. The house could accommodate 1,000 guests. It rarely hosted more than a dozen. The contrast was deliberate. The Clarks were wealthy enough not to need social validation. They valued privacy above status. Other Santa Barbara estates, Lotusland, El Heiress, the grand houses of Montecito, served as social centers for California's wealthy elite. Bellosguardo did not. The family went so far as to purchase all aerial postcards showing the estate. Thousands of postcards were stored in the carriage house to prevent the public from seeing the property. The desire for privacy was absolute. Huguette was a charter member of the Valley Club in Montecito, joining in 1928. Evidence of her golf playing appeared decades later when small holes were discovered in an upstairs floor, apparently left by golf shoes. But even this recreational activity was private, not social. The library was well used. Chairs were positioned near windows for natural light. The shelves held classics and contemporary novels, Agatha Christie mysteries among Anna and Huguette's favorites. The music room saw regular activity. The studio was Huguette's sanctuary, but the grand spaces, the formal dining room, the reception halls, the terraces designed for large gatherings, stood mostly empty. The visits became less frequent after World War II. By the early 1950s, the trips had stopped entirely. The exact date of the last family visit is lost to history. Most sources suggest 1953. Anna was in her 70s. Huguette was in her 40s. For reasons neither woman ever explained, they stopped coming to California. They never returned. Chapter 6. The Palace. Nobody visited. 10 years passed without a visit. The mansion sat ready for Anna and Huguette Clark to return from New York. Gardeners maintained the grounds. Housekeepers cleaned the interiors. Everything was kept in perfect order. No one came. The maintenance never stopped. Gardens were tended as if the family might arrive tomorrow. Lawns were kept immaculate. Seasonal flowers were planted and replaced. Trees were pruned. The irrigation system ran on schedule. Inside the house, furniture was carefully wrapped in custom protective coverings. A houseman dated and signed each covering in the 1960s. His signatures and dates remained visible decades later. Dishes were washed, covered, and dated in the 1990s. Linens were wrapped in brown paper with dates noted. Carpets were rolled and stored. The automobiles in the carriage house, a Chrysler convertible and a Cadillac limousine, sat with 1949 license plates. The plates were never updated, the cars were never driven, they became artifacts of a moment frozen in time. On the clifftop, the estate waited. The cost of waiting was substantial. Property taxes, staff salaries, utilities, maintenance, repairs. BIC, Priwen, and insurance totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. The house stood empty. The bills kept coming. In 1963, Anna Eugenia La Chapelle Clark died. She was 85 years old. Huguette inherited Bellosguardo. She was 57. She had not visited the California property in approximately a decade. Upon inheriting it, she gave the staff 2 instructions. Keep everything in first-class condition. Make no changes. The instructions were followed precisely. Nothing changed. Huguette lived at 907 Fifth Avenue in New York. The 42 rooms overlooking Central Park became her world. She painted, she played the harp, she added to her doll collection, which eventually included more than 1,000 pieces worth over $1 million. She maintained telephone relationships with a small circle of friends and advisors. She rarely left the apartments. She never returned to California. Between 1963 and 1991, Huguette lived alone in New York while maintaining Bellosguardo in perpetual readiness 3,000 miles away. The annual cost escalated. By the 1980s and 90s, maintaining the Santa Barbara estate required approximately $500,000 to $800,000 per year. The staff was reduced but never eliminated. The property taxes increased with inflation. The utilities ran continuously. Repairs were made as needed: roof maintenance, plumbing, painting, structural work. Over 28 years, Huguette spent an estimated $15 million to $20 million maintaining a house she never visited as the owner. Multiple parties approached her representatives about purchasing Bellosguardo. Developers recognized the value of 23 acres of oceanfront land. Offers reportedly ranged from $50 million to $100 million at various times. All were refused. When her attorney and accountant raised the question of selling, Huguette's answer was consistent. She was not ready. Her reclusiveness in New York deepened. By the late 1980s, she had reduced contact with the outside world to telephone calls and correspondence. She saw almost no one in person. Her world shrank to the apartments, her art, her music, and her dolls. In 1988, at age 82, Huguette was diagnosed with skin cancer. She was hospitalized briefly. The cancer was treated successfully. Doctors confirmed she was healthy and alert. She could go home. The brief hospital stay appeared to trigger something. 3 years later, she made a choice that completed her withdrawal from the world she had abandoned. Chapter 7. The Hospital Years. Huguette Clark owned 3 estates. The California property sat on 23 acres overlooking the Pacific. The New York apartments filled 42 rooms with views of Central Park. The Connecticut estate sprawled across 52 wooded acres. In 1991, at age 85, she moved into Doctors Hospital in New York. She occupied 2 private rooms. One was for sleeping. The other held her easel, her paintings, and her collection of dolls arranged on miniature furniture. She refused to leave. Her doctor strongly urged that she go home. She had no medical reason to remain hospitalized. She was healthy for her age, competent, and capable of living independently with assistance. She insisted on staying. The hospital, recognizing an exceptionally wealthy patient, accommodated her preference. Daily life in the hospital followed a routine. Huguette painted. She worked on canvases depicting models in elaborate period dress, still lifes, and New York cityscapes. She watched classic films, particularly cartoons. She maintained relationships by telephone. She ordered gifts online and by phone for friends, staff members, and institutions she supported. She refused visitors. Almost no one saw her in person during these years. Her primary human contact came from nurses and doctors. Hadassah Perry, a Filipino immigrant, worked as her private duty nurse. Perry initially worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Later, the schedule reduced to 8-hour days. She was paid $131,000 annually. Over 20 years, she would receive approximately $31 million in gifts from Huguette, cash, checks, real estate. The relationship evolved from medical care to companionship. Attorney Wallace Bach and accountant Irving Kamsler managed Huguette's finances and legal affairs. They visited occasionally. They handled the complexities of maintaining multiple properties, managing investments, and processing the continuous flow of gifts Huguette distributed. In 1997, Doctors Hospital closed. Huguette was transferred to Beth Israel Medical Center. The same arrangement persisted. 2 private rooms, painting, cartoons, dolls, telephone calls, no visitors. She would remain at Beth Israel for 14 years. The hospital costs were substantial. Maintaining 2 private rooms continuously, plus private duty nursing care, cost approximately $400,000 per year. The expense was not covered by insurance or Medicare. Huguette paid from her personal funds. Over 20 years, hospital living cost approximately $8 million. Simultaneously, she kept maintaining properties she no longer occupied. The apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue sat empty. She paid monthly maintenance fees of approximately $23,000. Annually, the empty New York apartments cost approximately $276,000. Bellosguardo in California required $500,000 to $800,000 per year for staff, taxes, utilities, and upkeep. The Connecticut estate added additional costs not publicly documented. The total approached $1,200,000 to $1,500,000 per year. She was spending this amount to maintain homes while living in a hospital. Over 20 years, the cost of preserving empty properties while occupying hospital rooms totaled approximately $24 million to $30 million. The financial absurdity was matched by the psychological mystery. Why choose institutional rooms over palatial estates? Staff at Beth Israel reported that Huguette seemed happy. She appeared content with her routines. She was described as lovely, respectful, soft-spoken, and concerned for others. Multiple doctors who treated her testified that she remained lucid and competent even as she reached 100 years old. There was no medical diagnosis of dementia or mental incapacity. She made her own decisions. She simply chose hospital life over mansion life. The choice defied rational explanation. Security might account for part of it. Hospitals provided controlled environments with immediate medical care available. Simplicity was another factor. 2 rooms. Required less management than estates with dozens of rooms and acres of grounds. Privacy was absolute. She could refuse visitors easily. Routine was predictable. Meals, care, and daily rhythms were consistent. But none of these explanations fully answered the question. She was one of the wealthiest women in America. She could have hired full-time medical staff for her apartments. She could have simplified her properties or sold them. She chose neither. She paid millions to preserve what she refused to use. On May 24, 2011, Huguette Clark died at Beth Israel Medical Center. She was 104 years old. She had spent the last 20 years in a hospital. She had spent the last 48 years maintaining Bellosguardo without visiting. She had spent approximately $30 million preserving properties she refused to occupy. When her will was read, 19 relatives who barely knew her discovered they had been written out entirely. The battle for her fortune began immediately. Chapter 8. The Battle for $300 million. Huguette Clark signed 2 wills within 6 weeks in 2005. She was 98 years old. She had lived in a hospital for 14 years. The first will, signed in March, left $5 million to her nurse Hadassah Perry and the remainder of her estate to 19 distant relatives. These relatives were descendants of William Andrews Clark's first marriage, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. Most had never met Huguette. Those who had known her had lost contact by 1957, more than 50 years before her death. The second will, signed in April, cut out the relatives entirely. It left $30 million to Nurse Perry. It established the Bellosguardo Foundation to operate the California estate as a public art center. It made substantial bequests to the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, Beth Israel Medical Center, and Huguette's goddaughter. It left $500,000 each to attorney Wallace Bach and accountant Irving Kamsler. Critically, it also named Bach and Kamsler as executors of the estate and trustees of the Bellosguardo Foundation. As executors, they would collect fees of approximately $3 million each. As trustees, they would receive additional compensation. The estate was valued at $300 million to $400 million. Bellosguardo alone was worth approximately $85 million. The New York apartments would eventually sell for a combined $23 million. The Connecticut estate, investments, art, and the doll collection added tens of millions more. The 19 relatives challenged the second will in surrogate's court in New York. Their legal argument centered on 2 claims. First, Huguette lacked testamentary capacity. She was 98 years old, living in a hospital, spending her days watching cartoons and playing with dolls. She was isolated from reality and could not have understood the complex decisions involved in estate planning. Second, she was subject to undue influence. Nurse Perry had daily contact for 20 years and received $31 million in gifts during Huguette's lifetime, plus $30 million in the will. Attorney Bach drafted the will that benefited him financially and named himself executor. Accountant Kamsler assisted and also benefited. Together, they isolated Huguette from family and manipulated her decisions. The defense argued that Huguette was competent and made her own choices. Multiple doctors testified that she was lucid and alert until her death. Independent witnesses who received no gifts from her confirmed her mental capacity. Medical records showed no evidence of dementia. Testimony from 54 depositions taken in 3 countries supported the conclusion that Huguette understood what she was doing. She deliberately excluded relatives she didn't know. She chose to benefit people who had been part of her life and institutions she valued. Her eccentricity was lifelong, not evidence of incompetence. The case attracted national attention. 16 law firms became involved. Discovery included reviewing documents covering her entire 104-year life. Depositions revealed details of her hospital existence, the gifts to her nurse, the enormous sum spent maintaining empty properties, and the influence wielded by her attorney and accountant. Jury selection began on Thursday, September 19, 2013. The trial was expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. Both sides faced enormous risks. If the relatives lost, they would receive nothing. If the estate lost, the second will would be invalidated, potentially requiring distribution under intestacy laws or the first will. 5 days after jury selection began, on September 24, 2013, a settlement was reached. The agreement was signed in the middle of the night and delivered to the judge the following morning. The terms protected elements of what each side valued most. The 19 relatives received $34,500,000, divided among them. The estate paid their legal fees of $11,500,000. They also received half of the $5 million that Nurse Perry would return, plus the right to pursue additional litigation against doctors in the hospital. Hadassah Perry received nothing from the will. She agreed to return $5 million of the $31 million in gifts she had received during Huguette's lifetime. She kept approximately $26 million. Her attorney received $1,500,000 in fees. The arrangement allowed her to avoid potential criminal prosecution and further attempts to recover the gifts. Wallace Bach and Irving Kamsler were removed as executors and trustees. They forfeited the $3 million each in executor fees they would have received. They lost their $500,000 bequests. They gave up trustee fees for the foundation. Bach's law firm's insurance paid $1 million to the relatives. Both men agreed to pay $100,000 to the estate. In exchange, the settlement dismissed malpractice claims and ended the threat of criminal prosecution. In June of 2015, the Manhattan District Attorney closed an investigation into their conduct without filing charges. The evidence supported their claim that they had been carrying out Huguette's wishes, not controlling her. Beth Israel Medical Center received the $1 million specified in the will. The Corcoran Gallery of Art received $10 million in cash and rights to proceeds from the sale of a Monet painting Huguette owned. Other beneficiaries, including Huguette's goddaughter, received several million dollars collectively. Most importantly, the Bellosguardo Foundation was preserved. The California estate would be transferred to a new foundation dedicated to fostering and promoting the arts. The foundation would be registered in New York, not California. The board would include representatives from the Clark relatives, the Corcoran Gallery, the Santa Barbara community, and other trustees selected by the New York Attorney General. The property could not be sold. It must be open to the public. Legal fees consumed approximately $30 million. The settlement allocated $11,500,000 for the relatives' attorneys, $11,500,000 for the defense, and $1,500,000 for the nurse's lawyer. Combined with taxes, penalties, and estate administration costs, the settlement and its aftermath reduced the estate by tens of millions. The battle was over. Huguette's wish that Bellosguardo become a public art center would be honored, but the property remained in limbo. 7 more years would pass before anyone could visit. Chapter 9. 7 Years of Silence. The settlement promised that Bellosguardo would open to the public. Huguette Clark had wanted the estate to foster and promote the arts. She had wanted visitors to see what she had preserved. The foundation was created. The assets were allocated. The public waited. Years passed. The gates remained closed. Between 2013 and 2018, the foundation faced another obstacle. The Internal Revenue Service determined that Huguette had unpaid and unfiled gift tax returns. The extensive gifts she had made during her lifetime, the $31 million to her nurse, millions to others, real estate transfers, triggered substantial tax obligations. The estate owed back taxes, penalties, and interest. Until the IRS matter was resolved, the property could not be formally transferred to the foundation. Negotiations stretched on for years. In December of 2014, a settlement was reached. The terms were approved by the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. The settlement was described as favorable to the foundation. After paying the IRS, the foundation's total assets exceeded $95 million, including the Bellosguardo property valued at $85 million, and cash for operations and restoration. In December of 2017, 4 years after the estate settlement, the property was officially transferred to the Bellosguardo Foundation. The deed passed from the estate to the nonprofit. The foundation could now begin the work of opening the estate to the public. The work proceeded slowly. The foundation was registered in New York and operated under the oversight of the New York Attorney General's office. The board included Jeremy Lindeman as president. John Douglas, who had served as estate manager for 35 years, had concerns about the foundation's direction. He wrote to board members in November of 2018 expressing those concerns. He died shortly after. His loss removed the person most knowledgeable about the property's history and maintenance. Between 2017 and 2021, the foundation operated with what local media described as stubborn silence and relative inactivity. Few public statements were made. Lindeman repeatedly promised press events to outline long-term strategic plans. The events never materialized. He declined interview requests. The community grew frustrated. A Santa Barbara independent investigation in 2018 raised questions about mismanagement, favoritism, and neglect. A local arts philanthropist hired a private investigator to examine the foundation's operations. In March of 2021, the foundation submitted an application to the City of Santa Barbara's Planning Division. The application sought a conditional use permit to offer small guided tours and hold special events. It also requested coastal development permits to install access ramps, portable restrooms, and approximately 90 parking spaces. City planning staff reviewed the application and deemed it incomplete. Basic questions were unanswered. How many guests per tour? How frequently would tours run? What hours? Would shuttle service be provided? How many docents? Would any live on the grounds? How often would events occur? How many people would attend? The staff noted that project plans were poorly organized. It was unclear how many ramps were proposed or where they would be located. The application process dragged on. Community frustration mounted. 7 years had passed since the estate settlement. 11 years since Huguette's death. The property she had wanted open to the public remained largely inaccessible. In late 2022, a breakthrough occurred. The foundation began offering tours. Tickets cost $100 per person for 90-minute visits. Small groups were led by trained docents through the first floor of the mansion and portions of the gardens. Tickets were released via email list every few months. They sold out within hours. Visitors finally walked through rooms Huguette had maintained but never visited. They saw approximately 40 of her paintings hung in the studio with 17-foot ceilings. The canvases depicted self-portraits, models in elaborate period dress, still lifes, and New York cityscapes. The work revealed an accomplished artist. They stood in the music room Anna had designed. They examined the library where chairs still sat positioned near windows for optimal reading light, bookshelves lined with classics and Agatha Christie mysteries. They walked gardens that had been tended for decades for an owner who never came. The docents were praised in reviews as knowledgeable, engaging and passionate about the property. Visitors described the experience as amazing, incredible, and moving. Many noted the house felt like a time capsule. Protective coverings still bore dates from the 1960s. The sense of frozen time was palpable. On December 15, 2025, the Santa Barbara Planning Commission officially approved the conditional use permits in a 6-to-1 vote. The permits legitimized the tours and special events the foundation had been offering. One commissioner voted against approval, expressing concern that the foundation had operated in a quasi-legal manner for 4 years before seeking permits and questioning whether $100 tickets met coastal access requirements for affordability. The approval marked a turning point. The palace nobody visited was finally opening its doors. Chapter 10. The Palace Awakens. Visitors arrive at the Clifftop Estate in small groups. Docents greet them at the entrance beneath a portico supported by columns. The tour begins in Huguette's art studio. Approximately 40 paintings hang on the walls. Self-portraits show a young woman with dark hair and thoughtful eyes. Models wear elaborate Victorian and Edwardian gowns. Still lifes capture flowers and objects with careful attention to light and shadow. New York cityscapes depict the urban world she observed from her apartment windows. The studio's 17-foot ceilings flood the space with north light. Easels and supplies suggest the painter might return at any moment. Docents explain that Huguette kept painting into old age, that art was central to her identity, that these canvases represent decades of quiet work done far from public view. The library reveals the reading habits of mother and daughter. Chairs remain positioned near windows. The shelves hold leather-bound classics alongside 20th-century novels. Agatha Christie mysteries sit among more serious volumes. The room feels lived in despite decades of vacancy. The music room was Anna's particular love. Music was her first passion. The space was designed for performances, for the harp Huguette played, for small gatherings of friends who appreciated culture more than society. The room speaks to what the Clarks valued: art, music, privacy, refinement. The dining room features painted canvas ceilings removed from a French chateau and reassembled in California. The elaborate murals depict classical scenes. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The formality of the space contrasts with the modest entertaining the family actually practiced here. Throughout the house, the sense of preservation dominates. This is not a museum that has been carefully curated. This is a home that was maintained in place, furniture covered and dated, dishes washed and stored, everything kept ready for occupants who never returned. The time capsule quality makes the experience eerie and moving. Outside, the gardens are being restored section by section. The original 1930s landscaping is still visible. Mature trees that are now 90 years old provide spectacular framing for ocean views. Paths wind through planted beds toward the cliff edge. The Greber fountains that once stood here were sold in 1988 by a previous occupant for a fraction of their value. Their absence is noted. Plans exist to create new water features that honor the originals. The tours currently show only the first floor and nearby gardens. The second floor remains closed. The kitchen is not accessible. The carriage house, where vintage automobiles with 1949 license plates still sit, is not yet open to visitors. The foundation plans to expand offerings. Future tours will focus on the cars, the gardens, and additional rooms as restoration work progresses. Special events complement the tours. Musical performances honor Anna's love of music and Huguette's harp playing. Art exhibitions feature local and regional artists. Lectures cover topics including Gilded Age history, the Clark family story, architecture, and preservation. Educational programs bring students to learn about art, history, and the challenges of maintaining historic properties. The property's condition reflects decades of deferred investment. The structure is sound. The concrete and steel frame that Reginald Johnson specified in the 1930s remains solid. The limestone facade is intact, though it has lost its luster. Windows need restoration or replacement. Interior surfaces show wear. Systems including electrical, plumbing, and heating require modernization to meet current codes and serve public use. Restoration is estimated to require $10 million to $20 million. The foundation has $95 million in total assets, but most of that value is the property itself. Cash available for restoration and operations is limited. Fundraising is active but challenging. The foundation operates tours, sells tickets, hosts events, and solicits donations. Whether these revenue sources can generate sufficient funds for complete restoration remains uncertain. The timeline is measured in years, possibly a decade. The foundation works methodically, addressing urgent repairs first, then expanding public access as resources allow. Community support is generally positive. Residents appreciate finally being able to visit a property that has been a local mystery for generations. Some neighbors express concern about traffic, parking, and the impact of increased visitation on the residential area. The foundation works with the city to address these concerns while fulfilling its mission. The mission remains what Huguette intended: to create a new home for art, music, history, and culture on the California coast. The vision is ambitious. Whether the foundation can fully realize it depends on funding, community support, and sustained effort over many years. The palace that sat silent for 60 years is finding its voice. The mansion Huguette maintained but never visited is welcoming visitors at last. The transformation from private obsession to public treasure is underway, but the journey is far from complete. Huguette Clark died in 2011 at age 104. She spent 20 years in a hospital. She spent 48 years maintaining Bellosguardo without visiting. She spent approximately $30 million preserving properties she refused to occupy. What she preserved was not just limestone and gardens. She preserved time itself. The furniture wrapped in the 1960s remains wrapped. The automobiles with 1949 license plates remain parked. The mansion she inherited as a 57-year-old woman stands much as it did when her mother built it in the 1930s. Bellosguardo is not merely a historic house. It is a time capsule created by obsession and sustained by fortune. The mystery of why she maintained what she abandoned will never be fully explained. Was it attachment to memories of mother and sister, fear of change, psychological need for control over something unchanging? Wealth enabling eccentricity that would be impossible for anyone else? All explanations are speculation. The facts speak for themselves. A woman with 3 magnificent estates chose 2 hospital rooms. A woman who could have sold Bellosguardo for $1. $100 million chose to spend $40 million maintaining it instead. The extremes of wealth produce extremes of behavior. Huguette Clark's choices were her own. We can document them. We cannot fully understand them. Her story asks uncomfortable questions about what we preserve and why. Most historic houses are saved because they represent achievement, contribution, or public significance. Bellosguardo represents private withdrawal, unexplained obsession, and voluntary absence. Should we preserve it? The question itself reveals how we think about history. We preserve battlefields where great events occurred. We preserve homes of leaders and artists. Bellosguardo is the house of a woman who did nothing public, built nothing lasting beyond the house itself, and withdrew so completely from the world that her death barely registered beyond the legal battle it triggered. Yet the house stands. The foundation works to open it. Thousands want to see it. Perhaps what Bellosguardo preserves is the mystery of human psychology more than architectural achievement. The Bellosguardo Foundation offers tours and events throughout the year. Tickets are released through the Foundation's email list at bellosguardo.org. Tours currently show the first floor of the mansion and portions of the gardens. The Foundation plans to expand access as restoration work progresses. The mission remains what Huguette intended, to create a new home for art, music, history, and culture on the California coast. Whether the Foundation can fully realize this vision depends on funding, community support, and time. What remains after all this time is not just a building, but a question. How much of our history should we preserve? And what does it say about us when the monuments we save are not celebrations of achievement, but testaments to withdrawal and mystery? Huguette Clark spent 60 years maintaining a palace she refused to see. We are spending decades trying to understand why. The house has outlasted the woman who built it, the daughter who preserved it, and perhaps our ability to explain either one. Bellosguardo stands not as an answer but as a permanent question mark on the California coast.